Record. Our guest is Maddy Martin, and Maddy, as I understand it, you are the head of growth and education at Smith.ai, which is a company that provides unified solutions to answer and act on every lead through live agents as well as AI. Would that be a fair summary?
That's right. Yep. And I recently moved into the role of VP of marketing. So just last month, I guess I need to update my bio, but that's about right. The role has not significantly changed, but I've been with the company now for 4 years, and it better reflects what I do here.
Congratulations, and I'd like to explore that in a little bit. But Maddy, on the Predictable B2B Success podcast, I interview people like yourself and founders to uncover an aspect of how they go about creating predictable business growth for their own businesses or that of others through empathetic content and conversations. Perhaps I could start with this question. What is the impression that you really want leads to experience when they interact with Smith.ai?
We really want leads to experience the responsiveness that we sell as our service. Absolutely. We want people to feel like they're being treated like people. Often we talk about leads and clients, and I think sometimes we get separated from the fact that they're just another human being trying to do their best and run a profitable business and go home for dinner with their family at the end of the night. So what we try to focus on with the leads is to evoke the experience that you will have as a client, and to drink our own Kool-Aid and live by our own creed that we promote in our marketing all across our services, that responsive businesses win more clients, and they also help retain existing business. There's a lot of brand lift that happens, and we have been very fortunate to experience that ourselves, that when you treat clients really well from the initial lead phase to the ongoing sort of client work, you can drive extremely efficient growth through referrals, through affiliate networks, through brand recognition and online reviews. And all of that starts with how you set the stage with your leads at the first conversation.
It's been a little while since you joined Smith.ai, but I was wondering if you could set the scene, so to speak, as to what it was like when you first joined Smith.ai, both from a sales and perhaps marketing point of view.
I think that it's a really good segue talking about setting the stage for your clients. You also want to set a stage for your employees and for your staff. And from very early on, back 4 years ago when I joined Smith.ai, it was a product-led company, and it continues to be today. And I think that holding true, and the founders, Aaron Lee and Justin Maxwell, staying really true to that original design of the company, to say, we're rooted in Silicon Valley. We have deep experience in tech, in B2C and B2B, but in really well-designed, well-orchestrated, well-marketed, well-run companies and product. So I think what has happened over the last 4 years, when I came in, I was the first real marketing hire, and I built up the team, and we have many channels cranking away today. But I also looked at what was working, and what was working then and continues today, thanks a lot to the product-led growth, is the referral network that we have created. So the percent of referrals as a portion of our total growth has maintained over time, obviously investing in other channels. We still see, maybe not the vast majority, like any successful early businesses really led by referrals, it's only by word of mouth. It's still a substantial portion, and the majority coming from reviews, referrals, affiliate partners, marketing agencies that want their clients to experience Smith.ai. What happens is, when you set the stage with product-led growth, if the product delivers, you should expect clients to also continue to rave about the impact that's having on their business. And it's not just a bit of puffery and fluffery where you've got big commercials now and you have all of these new leads, but do they stick around? There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in marketing sometimes. And I think what really guides us, and what gets me jumping out of bed in the morning, is to look at the numbers and to say, wow, we're still getting so many organic natural leads who come in thanks to the rave reviews of clients who may have been with us for a month or for 5 years.
Excellent. And you've grown the business to 7 figures in revenue. Would you mind sharing what sort of revenue was coming in via sales when you first joined?
Revenue, I wouldn't share necessarily, but the client base has gone from a couple hundred to over a couple thousand, basically. So that alone, along with a lot of product development, I think is really outstanding. So not only have we expanded significantly on the virtual receptionist service, but we added live website chat, we added text answering and Facebook message answering, even some in-app answering in a marketplace that where there's an exchange between leads and the professionals themselves who are carrying out services who may not be available to be responsive when the leads sort of message in. So that functionality expanding so significantly over the course of the last few years has also expanded who we can serve and why. When we first started, it was a lot of solo and small businesses. Now we're seeing more mid-market who will plug us in perhaps to their sales department to say, the sales executives have to spend their time on demos, on meaningful calls that have been pre-vetted, their sales qualified leads. And it's really disruptive, and it really throws a wrench in the normal curve of business throughout a week, a month, a quarter to say, should I pick up this random call that's calling in? I'm going to have my workday interrupted. Can I prepare in time for that demo later when you have sort of those incoming calls? So having Smith.ai in front of a sales department, even in a larger company, has become really interesting, not to mention the agency approach where we have developed a sort of white label solution, a reseller model that allows us to plug in a number of ways to help agencies who are facilitating this B2B success for their clients. The really unique thing is that they can then go to those clients and without developing something new or coming up with a program and testing and carrying the risk that includes, they are able to say, I want Smith.ai for my clients. We continue to do the vast majority, the lion's share of all the work. It's not much more work. It leads to incredible ROI when you think, okay, my clients hired me to do advertising or a website or whatever the case may be. They want at the end of the day, though, not the website, but the clients that the new website promises, right? Like we have to keep focus on the goal and the end and not the means. What happens is the client may say, well, thanks so much for generating all of those clicks, but we didn't get any clients. And when you dig in, oftentimes it's because that call wasn't answered the first time and a lot went to voicemail, or this team hasn't been trained on how to handle a new lead and whoever's available picks it up or not. And as a result, not only our direct clients, but also the agencies are seeing more satisfaction at the end because they are able to more predictably drive marketing ROI or advertising ROI on that ad spend when they know the call or chat or text message is going to be picked up the same every time. And that, when we talk about predictable success, you have to tie down every stage of the funnel. And if you don't tie down the very top of the funnel and have screening or efficient sort of scheduling transfers at that point, you end up having a lot of variability that you don't recognize later on.
That's terrific, and it's great to hear the growth and some of the aspects that you include in the overall brand experience. So there's a fair bit to unpack there, but perhaps a good place to start would be, how do you define the overall brand experience for a company?
So the brand experience has to be in the sort of essence of every communication, right? So the brand experience is the living up to the expectations that you set. And experience is just, it's always relative. So if you're going to travel to Paris, or you're going to travel to Thailand, or you're going to travel to, the bad part of Buffalo, New York, where I live, like I don't live there, but I live in Buffalo, and there is a bad part, so to speak, that I wouldn't walk alone. You have an expectation of what your experience is going to be. And similarly, when we spend so much on ads, on marketing, on our email templates and drips and the systems that power them, more importantly, we set so much of the cart before the horse, and then we are exhausted and we can't handle the next bit of work, which really should come first along with everything else, which is the follow through, which is the answering, which is the friendliness and professionalism and expectation that someone is going to be devoted to that. And the sad part is that was often, and in many ways still is, downgraded. It's always been a lowly role to be the receptionist or to be a chat agent or to be that first line of communication. But if you don't take it seriously, then you tarnish everything that you spent so much time and energy and money on building up that brand experience. So the experience, you may set an expectation with your commercial, with your ad, or with the shiny, happy people, with the fancy, beautiful charts, with all of the data that you poured in to make great ads and dial in your targeting. Who cares if you did all that market research, if you don't pick up the phone, if you don't sound friendly when you answer, and it's not reliable to get in touch with your business? There is no experience that follows that initial one. So to me, brand experience has to be consistent, and it has to have longevity built into it, because it's not what's your first impression. It's what is every impression, and is that being controlled and monitored, and is that seen as just as important as anything else, which often it isn't.
Certainly. So if I could unpack that a bit and tease out some of the elements of why a brand experience would be important, because I think from a leadership point of view, a lot of people would think it's highly intangible and difficult to put some metrics or that could be measured around it. But really, from what I'm hearing, it certainly creates a degree of humanization or empathy, if I could put it that way. It's certainly better engagement, and from what I'm hearing, that allows for greater reach and trust as well. Perhaps more importantly, real-time feedback, as well as the opportunity to design the way you go about achieving your objectives in perhaps a more tangible way. Would that be a fair summary?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And just the best way to get to the heart of it is to do an audit and to follow that customer journey from start to finish and figure out where the gaps are, where people are falling through, and where the sentiment doesn't seem to match the level of effort, to be totally honest. If you think that people are going to be moving forward at a higher clip, and you've spent considerable money on the awareness and the advertising and everything around that, the reach and the engagement initially, someone downloaded your, lead magnet, or, someone used your promo code in a commercial, then what? And oftentimes the campaign doesn't take into account sort of the entire follow through. And the other thing that I would say about brand experience that's really important to measure is the number of questions from internal teams to the marketing or sales teams. So is there a lot of back and forth and chatter, wondering what the campaign is, or wondering like, how do we service this request that just came in that a client has understood from our marketing or sales efforts? If that is very high, that would be concerning about brand experience, because those questions actually underneath them, there are misalignments that happen that aren't even being asked. So let's say 3 times there are gaps in knowledge between the onboarding or support team and the marketing and sales team. Let's say 1 out of those 3 times someone raises their hand and says, I don't know how to answer this question, I'm going to ask the marketing and sales team. The other 2 out of 3 times, they're talking internally in their little pod and they're trying to figure out the right answer, and maybe they give an interim answer, or maybe they give the answer to the best of their ability. And then there's really an inconsistency in that experience from what you were told by the sales team and what you got at the end of the day. And I was just in a Facebook group earlier today where someone was saying they signed up with a software company a specific industry CRM. And they paid a large sum of money and in 5 figures for a year. And it's been a year and they still don't have it implemented. And they felt the onboarding was a really poor experience. And why aren't they getting more coaching and hands-on sort of proactive white glove help? That always leads me to think about the brand experience set up potentially and often unintentionally from the sales team. And a great example of that for anyone who's listening. What is your shipping time? What is your onboarding time? What is your new account setup time? Those are all things that many of us are very familiar with. It is critical from a marketing and sales perspective to consistently ask questions and say, is this still the case? Because often internal teams just look inward and you need to draw them out of those inward sort of departments and say, is this still the case? Are we still onboarding clients within 2 weeks? No, now it's 3 weeks. We have a backlog, or actually we expedite it now and it's a week. If you don't promote those dialogues, it's very hard to get that rapid update that you need to set the client's expectations properly. Right now during COVID, I think we all know that shipping is going to take longer. If you haven't updated your policies on your website to say it's going to be a little bit longer than normal, that's something worthwhile to do. And I think these little nitty-gritty fixes often get overlooked as your business grows. And those were the things that you took care of when you were smaller that really made the difference to the clients, why they were loyal to you. So if you lose sight of some of those things that seem minor, you actually end up losing some of that loyalty and intentionality that your clients stick to you by.
And when you say or recommend companies conduct an audit, are you looking at this from an internal perspective, or do you also have people, do you spend time garnering opinions from customers as well as to how they see it?
That's a very good question. I would consider an audit to be internal, but I would combine it with a survey, customer feedback, which should be ongoing. And one of the things that you can do now is with AI tools or even with internal sort of checklists, you can have those audits and feedback happen together where they're after an onboarding, for example. It might be the case that the onboarding person will say how they thought that it went, and the client will report how they thought it went. And you can have both internal and external sort of reporting at the same time, which gives you excellent data, because then you're taking a snapshot and saying, is there parity on both sides of that experience? Because there should be. And if there isn't, where's the perception breaking, right? Where did the client say it wasn't a good experience and the onboarding, person said it was just fine, I give myself a 10 there, or I perceive the client to give us a 10 there. That's often a really good way of figuring out where there are gaps, or maybe where there's training that's required. Why did the client have an expectation that wasn't met as well as you thought you did there? There probably are also opportunities in the middle of those onboarding experiences, in the middle of a purchasing experience, to make sure that you're aligned so that you don't get to the end of it and say, oh, how did we do? Don't be afraid to, in the middle, check in and make sure that it's exactly what that person or business is.
I'm curious, I understand that a lot of the focus could be around the user experience. Is it important to also take stock of whether we're on point with brand design and voice?
Oh, definitely. And I think that there's vocabulary that everyone at the company should be familiar with, and also vocabulary that's internal only. And then what do we share with our clients and our customers? Because we all know there are a whole set of words and acronyms that you use as shorthand internally. It's very important that people understand that some of those are only internal, and not because they're going to offend anyone, but because it creates confusion or inconsistency. Also because it requires explanation when you can be using something that's not quite insular. And what happens is, as new people are trained, that should be included in the training just as important as everything else. And often it's important later on in the training and not the very first thing, because it gets watered down. You learn so much about the product or the service, whatever business you're in, And then you totally forget about the introductory, like first couple days where they say, this is who we are, welcome to the team. Later on is actually really good because you understand why that matters. You understand what those words mean when you say, what does onboarding mean? What does a demo mean? What does a trial or guarantee period mean? What is a plan defined as at our company? That's, I think, it's critical to have that well documented and shared, and also a feedback channel so people can ask questions. I'm not quite sure how to use this word in this context, or give examples, have shadowing so you can see some of the best performers at the company using that vocabulary effectively in conversations with clients.
Certainly. I'm also curious, you almost, from the sounds of it, setting benchmarks within the organization as to how you should deliver an experience and perform. Do you look to other industries for inspiration for those benchmarks, or is it just purely based around how you wish to operate and maybe the competition as well?
When we think about net promoter scores and things like that, there are benchmarks across industries, company size, B2B versus B2C, you name it, people have sliced and diced it. But there's also this underlying thing that a lot of people miss when they look at the benchmarks, when they look at just the numbers. Very rarely do we discuss what the business goals are. So a really good example of this, we work with many law firms at Smith.ai. And there are some law firms who have been around for a very long time. They've been there and done that with the very big firm, cranking away, they're printing money, right? And they were taking in a ton of leads, working all the business possible. And maybe the owner now, and there are many examples of this in real life, but I'll refrain from sharing any individual information. The owner now is very strict on who she takes as a client, right? And her goal is to work as little as possible for the best clients who she will enjoy working with and for, and to make the money that she needs to live, right? Or comfortably live, or however you define that for yourself. Then there are others who have different goals. Maybe they are trying to rapidly expand and open a new office in different cities, or they've just opened their law office and they're very hungrily trying to create their client base. If you say, what is your sort of benchmarks every step of that marketing funnel, to the first person, a conversion rate of 1% out of all the leads who are coming into her could be seen as terrible, but actually she sees it as hitting her goal because she wants to be very strict. And then on the other side, people who would have a 1% conversion rate would be pulling their hair out because they're trying to grow as fast as possible and they're fully invested in however much money it's going to take to get there. When the phones ring, get that client an appointment and close them. And you can think of personal injury or some areas where typically there's something that can be done for that client who contacts a personal injury firm, let's just say. Whereas in the first case, they really want to be more choosy. So when it comes to products, let's say it's a boot or a CRM software or email marketing service, there's not necessarily going to be the same discretion when it comes to strictness with incoming clients. But it does benefit us to think in that extreme, because there are clients who do give off red flags, who may disrupt that data you're collecting because they are not a good fit for the business for whatever reason, or they have misaligned expectations that don't speak to the brand sort of communication error, but to their misalignment with what it should cost to deliver services to meet their needs. And I think anyone who's been in business long enough understands that sometimes there are people who want real leather for the fake leather price, and it's just not going to happen no matter how much you hope and pray, right? So the brand experience always needs a gut check where you can set a baseline early on to say, maybe how long have you been in business? or sort of what questions can you ask to gauge the maturity of their business or the business owner or management who's answering that survey? Do you take that result with a grain of salt or not? How much weight does it have against it? And to me, and there was a very, very early on in my career, and I went to culinary school after I was an econ major. I was working for a really brilliant guy who was creating similar to a Zagat review guide called Opinionated About Dining. And Steve Plotnicki, and I loved working for him. And he had this brilliant idea that the reviews count more when you review more, when you've had the experience. If you travel the world eating Michelin-starred restaurants, food, then your review is going to be weighted more heavily. And I thought, well, that makes sense. And that's rarely done in any other business setting that I've seen since. And I was in my early 20s then, maybe I was 21. And that's 14 years ago today. And we think that's still really not done. People don't weight the quality of reviews. They take in all the reviews from all their clients and they give a sort of average. You have to look a little bit deeper. And that's what I'm saying.
And that's certainly a good piece of advice or goal, as I would put it there. Consistency is important as responsiveness for live agents or even AI solutions that we might use to allow for that. How important is it to not just ask a few questions and maybe schedule an appointment, but to really be able to offer something to engage your potential client and develop a sense of anticipation for the next interaction?
I think it's really important to have the human element there when and where it's needed. There is a place for AI, but it's not to the point where it is completely genuine compassion and empathy and reading the situation perfectly, right? Yeah. And people will throw all sorts of things at you during a chat or a call. Sometimes they really just want to talk. And one of the hardest things as a human is to politely interrupt and take back control of the conversation. That's one of the things that we do really well at Smith.ai that I think is often overlooked as a talent, because you need to keep the cost down so that we can be affordable for our clients, right? You can't have a 20-minute call every single time because someone is calling in and they get carried away. How would AI interrupt someone and then take back that conversation? Very difficult to do and very culturally nuanced. So how, I might do it is very different from someone who might do it in Beijing. So anyway, the sort of human element comes in where you've got, for any number of reasons, I could use a law firm example again, but it may even be a boots purchase, hiking boots, because that's a birthday present for somebody. You have no idea what the sincerity or severity or sensitivity is to that person on the other end, because you can't read their mind and neither can AI. And you have to let them talk and interpret the next step. So yes, you can automate a lot. You can ask them to choose among a number of paths, so to speak, and then take them down that path. But A, you have to have a human there to interrupt. B, you have to have a human there to identify if that person seems to be carrying the same momentum that they did when they first came in, and how to recover if not, and how to continue it if so. And there are tools at their disposal, especially for our receptionists. But there are some businesses that can be fairly transactional with a chat, for example, or text message, Facebook message. But oftentimes, and especially in service businesses, and almost all of the time when it comes to very high-end sort of professional services, B2B services, a marketing agency, a business strategist, law firm, finance, medical, you name it, high end, that is going to lead to a consultation. It's going to lead to a pretty high bill at the end of the day. Anything bespoke or custom, you expect, again, that brand experience to start from the very first conversation. So if it's not going to be a bot delivering the law services to you, then the bot only gets you so far, because the idea is to carry that experience, that tone, the voice of the brand. And lawyers are not bots yet, if they ever will be. how are you going to approximate that brand experience with a bot only sort of solution when the human is the one who delivers the service at the end of the day? You have to bridge that gap. So you might do a hybrid approach, or you might just have a human being. But at the end of the day, at a certain level of service, certain cost for your product or service, you're going to require that human intuition. And that comes with experience. At Smith.ai, we hire with the intention to bring in people who already have a lot of hospitality, customer service experience, many from military backgrounds and even state courts or law offices, or people who've been in a strongly professional, demanding setting. But if you don't screen for that initially, it's extremely hard also to teach someone how to be compassionate once they're a fully formed adult, right? Mm-hmm. So it is also something that you have to have tests for your staff or for whomever, like vendor is providing these services to you. It's not something you can expect them to train. And if they say to you that they're training compassion in their staff, something's wrong. And that's basically what we're trying to do with AI. And that's why we think that it's humorous, because as adults, we know, and we saw the children grow up and other people you interact with, and by and large, people don't change by the time they're adults. That screening and hiring has to happen to bring in the right people. And that's another thing to think about with brand experience. If you believe that anyone can be trained on your brand, but they have no history and proof of carrying forward, why do you think they're going to now? And that's one of the reasons why it can be very hard to transition from being a freelancer back to a company, which we see a lot of job applicants doing today, because the job market is so hot. A lot of people are leaving freelance to go back into work. Especially now that it's remote, at least in the US, a lot of people are getting flexible jobs. It's much more competitive now to work for a company. And healthcare costs and all those other things are benefits to working for a large company. It's critical that you have the interpersonal experience and the experience speaking from someone's voice other than your own, e.g. the company, because that is something that you can get very quickly out of the habit of doing. And then it becomes hard to use a company voice instead of your own, instead of having that sort of business owner mindset. In a staff, it is desirable to some extent, but also you have to know when you are to sound like a brand and not like yourself.
Certainly. So my takeaway would be that even though people may interact through a variety of channels, it's really critical that we deliver a consistent experience right across all those channels. And I would assume that's perhaps a low-hanging fruit that most companies don't address. Would that be correct?
It's absolutely correct. And I think we overlook very often that if someone calls you and you're extremely responsive, you're like, I heard Maddy and I totally get it. I'm going to make sure that all my phone calls are answered 24/7. And we've even got bilingual people answering, and man, like what a great experience. But you don't realize that there are text messages coming through your business number or Facebook messages coming through your Facebook page, because Facebook's now a recommendation engine. They're not going to Google after finding out about your business. They're finding the Facebook page and staying right there and hiring right there. So buying right there. So if you have neglected one channel because that's the channel of preference for that person, then you have delivered a vastly different and largely worse brand experience for that person who may no longer be interested in working with your company. And even though you've tried so hard to tie up the phone side on the chat, on text, on Facebook, wherever it is, if you have a blind spot, then you'll start to see people grumbling and wonder why. That's why we have done the audit already, right? You've taken just a spreadsheet and documented where all of your marketing channels are and who's responsible for monitoring those inbound messages. And then also for things like forms, the outbound message needs to go out. If you have form fills on your website, and it might be a request to have a consult or request to get more information, some submitting of information as an inquiry, and you're not getting back to them extremely quickly, then they've gone and filled out forms at 7 other websites, and they've probably gotten in touch with someone because someone's doing that. And if you're not, you're at a disadvantage. So the omni-channel sort of responsiveness is one of the most important things to look at early on. And it's really making sure that you are staffing the channels where you have acknowledged your business has a profile or a presence. And it's as simple as that. And then from there, you can improve, you can test, you can tweak the brand experience, but there's nothing to worry about until you've at least done that audit and you're covered. Because covering, to be totally honest, Vinay, like if you totally mess up or you're inconsistent with the brand experience, you bungle, you don't use the right vocabulary, but you pick up every single time, you will just grow the business on that alone. And I think like the optimist in me loves how easy that is and how reachable that is, because it's not about overthinking it. It's not about perfecting sort of the brand experience. It's just making sure that you are there for that lead when they come in every time, and that you don't have any blind spots and you don't make people wait for you because they're going to expect to wait later on, and that will inform their lower expectations of a brand experience. And then they'll think, why do you charge that? Because I'm already starting to discount your services because of the experience I've just had.
Certainly. And from that, I would gather that you're really wanting to place experience before sales. Would that be a fair comment?
I absolutely think that's a fair comment. I rarely hear it put that way. And I think that if you don't consider the experience as part of your product or service, then you are doing a disservice to yourself and to your clients or customers, but you also don't yet have the product or service finished, because the product and service are only so good that you can actually sell it. And selling it means having a process that is clear cut and well defined. Why does it work that way? It embodies the brand, and then you can sell it. You can't have a sales team that doesn't have that sort of to fall back on. It's going to be a very uneasy, inconsistent, Wild West sort of sales team if you don't have that already set up.
Certainly. And my other takeaway was the fact that just in being consistent and present, you're not really required to spend any extra in terms of marketing budget. You could pretty much do it with
you
what
should
you have.
be spending less. You should at least be recouping the cost of the investment in your systems and in the receptionist service and the chat service. It should pay for itself. And this is actually something that is not focused on nearly enough. Some of the inputs in your business are going to be just fixed costs, and it's the cost of doing business. But there are other things that really do have economies of scale over time, and they go down as the system improves and the clients start to flow through over time. And you realize, okay, if Smith.ai is, let's say, $7 a call, then what does it mean to get a new client or a customer or product sold? Well, it's many times that, right? And even if your conversion rate is low, like you still have a lot of room to play. If you're in software, if you are in B2B products or manufacturing, your margins are such that, or even your referrals are so strong that maybe your conversion rate is 30-50% to get a new client once they contact you. But even if it's much less, I think that there are a lot of people who see services as an upfront cost, but when you look a month later, it's more than paid for itself. And a lot of people don't even get started because they are afraid of taking on a new cost. But the most successful business owners are the ones who know that it takes money to make money. The sort of betrayal there that often happens is with marketing agencies or with DIY advertising and marketing, you can get yourself in very hot water and spend a ton of money with very little accountability. You can, for example, when I was sharing about the CRM, spend money on a 1-year contract, and 1 year later, or a 5-year contract, 1 year later, you still don't have it set up.
Yeah.
There is a loss of value many times when there's a prepayment for the service. And that sets our expectation in ways that hurt us because we don't move forward with other services that get prepaid that actually are extremely valuable. So I would honestly look at what is the risk assessment. What is the upside? And take more risks when it's short term and a reasonable cost, instead of going full bore into what everyone else is doing, which is getting the latest CRM of the moment, when in reality, that's probably not going to move the needle at all for you, because you'll only use 10% of the CRM's features, if that, and it's all pretty much the same if you're going to use it exactly as you always do with your last CRM. So what are the actual software programs and services that you can implement that are net new, meaning a receptionist service that's totally different from anything that your business has had, to bring economies of scale and efficiency, where you're going to keep spending the same amount of marketing dollars. You're going to capture more of the leads that come through those clicks and eyeballs and engagements. And then you're going to see that, let's say, $10,000 in marketing spend that used to have an initial sort of appointment rate of 10%. Now it's magically 25%, and you didn't pay nearly as much as the revenue that came in. So there is a huge upside. You see an impact, and guess what? It's completely repeatable. And I think this is the really key thing. You may find if you hire a single receptionist or a chat agent, you hire someone, you'll see an improvement, but you are locked into that person continuing to do a great job, available to you, not hired by someone else, not disrupted by the things that happen in life that take you away from work or even reduce your productivity.
Yeah.
If you have a team of hundreds of those same people, that is what's going to unlock the business growth for you, because it is reliable. And then you can stake your reputation and brand experience on something that has that much of a backstop against it.
Certainly. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're almost required to not just look at the processes and experiences that you want to deliver, but you also need to look at perhaps your tech stack as well, and do a bit of an audit there on a regular basis, from the sounds of it, to ensure it's all synced up.
And I think that the one thing that shocks me is that people never call their business phone number to make sure that there aren't 8 rings until you connect with someone, which is often fixable, just calling your VoIP service. There are people who are taking calls who don't sound friendly. That should never be the case. There are people who are taking calls that are supposed to be video calls, and they're just phone calls, and they're not showing up on video. And we know that hurts conversion rate, right? What are the things in your business that you have assumed are continuing on as you set them up that is really not the case, because no one checked and no one asked and no one really looked under that hood? It needs to be a consistent task for you every, so often. I'm not going to set a cadence, because it depends on what it is. You're not going to take a look at your email drips that run perfectly every time and continue to deliver new leads through the funnel on a weekly basis. That would be foolish. I'm sure they're running still. But on the phone side, on looking at the internet, is the sales team delivering the quality of conversation that you expect them to through the SDRs and the sales executive? That's something to look at, and to secret shop and to call in and audit and make sure that it's working well. The other thing that we see often fail, conversion pixels and things like that. If you have advertising campaigns, and is it counting properly? Is it attributing properly? Because that could lead to decision-making that is very wrong, or the spend is not allocated correctly. And a lot of these things are changing rapidly, because you have the systems that are underlying iOS 14, for example, changing up how pixels are done. If the team is not taking time away from other things to redirect and focus on that in the moment, then you have a problem. There are also, for remote workers, a lot of connectivity issues, and you need to make sure that if you have the existing staff and they're now working from home, they're like this idea that, oh, it's just going to be about distractions, and do they have a work environment where they're not also trying to do childcare throughout the day? Or if they are, how do we accommodate that? There are a lot of tech issues. Do people need hardline internet to their computer? Do they need a quiet headset because they just can't possibly be at home and have a quiet phone call? Do they download Crisp, which is a sort of quieting app. There are a lot of things to look at both internally and externally that will determine what is that brand experience. You might have a whole team of sales executives, but one of them doesn't have a headset that's very high quality, or they're not using Crisp. And if every single call is garbled or it's hard to understand, then that person's conversion rate is going to be affected by something that maybe is an easy fix, and it's not. Do they know the vocabulary or not? It's their calls can't be understood, and the person's frustrated for no fault of the sales team, except that it is someone's fault because you didn't fix it and it's fixable. So I would say the tech stack is really important. It's also really important when you're qualifying potential clients to make sure that your system is going to play well with theirs. And we at Smith.ai work very closely, almost as the keystone, as you'd expect a receptionist service to be, with the calendaring system, with the CRM, with the phone system and the website. When we install chat, what happens? When we answer calls that are transferred or forwarded to us, what happens? What happens when we use the intake form that the CRM has hosted, or the calendaring link that's on Calendly or Schedule Once or Acuity or any number of them? The billing and payments, do they have a secure credit card form? If someone comes to you and wants you to take payments for them and you don't yet have a billing solution, that's going to block that experience from being fulfilled. So I would also say, make sure that you set reasonable expectations in your questionnaires with clients, and you say, look, you answered that you want us to take payments for you, but you don't yet have a billing solution. And maybe you make recommendations, but you're going to have to stop that line item from being added to the bill until the client gets the tech stack that they need for you to fulfill their request. So it really is about coming to a mutual understanding and being upfront early on that you are as good as you're both invested in that relationship. If someone says, answer my calls, and they won't tell you anything about their business, we can't possibly be successful for you. So we can make assumptions, but we'd be shooting into thin air. Yeah, there's the tech stack absolutely is important.
Yep, there's a critical piece in the whole puzzle. Is there another aspect to creating a consistent brand experience that we haven't quite touched upon, but you feel is quite important?
Oh, we've touched on so many things today. Is there another thing about brand experience? I would just say, let me think for a moment. I would say that there is a difference in the size of the business that we haven't talked about that is really important to know who the decision makers are. Mm-hmm. Sometimes as companies grow, they don't change their vocabulary or their process, even though they want to go up market. And if you're used to working with solo and small, or you're used to working with enterprise and then you've opened a new SMB line, the issue is that the vocabulary often is delayed, and that lag creates issues with the brand experience because someone feels like you're not talking my language or my timeline's not aligned with yours. If you, for example, in SMB, if you then go up to mid-market and you expect deals to turn around at the same time, you're out to lunch. Like, it's just not going to happen. There are multiple stakeholders, there's meetings, there's approval processes, and then maybe you'll get in. If there's budget, or you have to wait till the entire next cycle, which might be a quarter or a year. Yeah. And then on the other side with enterprise, if you treat things with the formality and the red tape and the sort of like the whole rigmarole, which is understandable in an enterprise level discussion, but irritating in a solo small business discussion, you will betray that your customer as well as you say you do. So if you walk through this really heavy process, the solo or small business just wants to get on with it and move on to the next thing on their plate, how can you cut and streamline? Do you have to go through the 100 questions, or can you just fast track them? Is there a light plan? If they're paying less, is there more self-service, right? Yep. What sort of elements can you include? And again, as long as you set the expectation, certain DIY elements may be totally fine and even preferable for them because they can do it on their own time. but be careful to not impose these sort of expectations of one business type or size or maturity level on another, because often that is where you'll out yourself as new to that area. And then they'll go and think, who is more experienced working with someone like me? Because at the end of the day, even if it's B2B, businesses are run by people, and they do want to work with people who speak their language and who pick up on what's important to them. And that's another human being.
Certainly. Okay. Is there, looking into the future, are there aspects of creating a brand experience that we should be keeping an eye out for in relation to, say, trends or other issues that are coming up that we should really be keeping an eye on?
I'll say this. I don't think that there are issues that are worth pursuing unless you have tackled all the other issues that are the lowest hanging fruit. Yes, you could go and get the AI that helps you determine sentiment analysis by listening to your phone calls and going through your chats and emails and everything. But are you at the stage where you can bear that distraction? Probably not. Most companies have some other low-hanging fruit to handle than that. Now, that's a solid investment if, again, you have the human resources to go through and analyze and utilize the data from that investment of time and energy and money. There are a lot of phenomenal tools, but is your business at a point where that's the most important thing to focus on, or is that the next shiny thing that is going to be the distraction from you achieving other goals that have been already identified? I would put it on the list of something to explore and keep that Eisenhower decision matrix close in your mind of, do I do it now or delegate? So that's my number one request, is that you have a in the future folder. You have notes, you have your own fun time for reading books and exploring what's out there, but you have to make a business case for it and stack rank it against the other business cases for improvements that you have had on your list for a long time. And why aren't those done yet? And why does that get to skip ahead?
Certainly. This has been a treat, Maddy. Thanks for doing this. If you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
That's a great question. My top takeaway would be focus on the fundamentals of your business and tune into your clients. And the way to do so is to listen and tune into your internal teams. And the way to do so is to listen, and you can listen through the responses to your survey. So ask and then do something with that information.
Brilliant. Maddy, if listeners wanted to find out more or to connect with you, where would you recommend they head?
You can connect with me if you'd like to. I am on LinkedIn, so you can find me, Maddy Martin, Madeline Martin. I'll probably show up in one of those names. And if you want to learn more about Smith.ai, which I hope you do, our website is Smith.ai, and we are reachable by phone at 650-727-6484. We staff our own phone lines, drink our own Kool-Aid, so you'll hear our receptionist on the phone. You can even chat with us on the website and text us at that number too. Not a blind spot for us, thankful to say. And you can email us at hello@smith.ai. We have also provided $100 off your first month of service with the code PredictableB2B. So take advantage of that and give us a try. We would love to show you what we can do by phone, by chat, by message.
Brilliant. Maddy, thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks, Vinay. Nice being here.